The message clicked off and I just sat there behind the wheel of my parked truck, engine still popping as it cooled, my coffee turning lukewarm in the cup holder. I'm Delia Kessler. I was 35 that spring, and that was the morning my father used a voicemail to tell me I no longer counted as his kid. I listened to it one time. I didn't hit replay. His tone was flat, and behind it, way down low, I could pick out Diane murmuring something I couldn't make out. "You're done here. Stay away. We're moving forward, and you're not part of it." I stared at the screen for a good while. Then I tapped out a single word and sent it. "Fine." Here's the thing none of them stopped to consider while they were busy cutting me loose. I was the one who literally controlled everything they were standing on. By sunrise the following day, my phone showed 52 calls I'd missed. Hang on, I'll get there. If you've ever been the glue holding an entire family upright right up to the second they decided you were easy to throw away, stick with me, because you're going to want to know how this lands. Quiet people keep records, and one firm boundary can hit harder than any screaming fight. Let me rewind and give you the full picture. I run a small bookkeeping and tax office on Bishop Street in Caldwell Springs, Indiana. We've got maybe 3,200 people in the whole town. I handle payroll for the hardware store, quarterly filings for a couple of churches, and the books for a big chunk of the farms out this way. Folks come see me when their numbers stop matching up, when the tax people mail them something that makes their palms go damp, when some son-in-law skips town with the equipment loan money. I'm the one who reads the small print slowly and out loud until it makes sense. Funny thing is, my own family had turned into a set of numbers that hadn't balanced in a long, long time. I picked up this trade the rough way. I was 21 when my mom got sick, and I walked away from college to drive her to Indianapolis 2 days a week, close to 2 hours each direction, a thermos of coffee riding between us on the seat. I taught myself trust law and tax code right there at her kitchen table, because somebody in the family needed to actually understand the documents, and the attorneys billed you for every single question. My mother's name was Marion. She always had soil under her fingernails and a real gift for numbers, and she drilled it into me that a ledger tells the truth even when the people around it don't. When the cancer showed up a second time, she sat me down at that very table and named me trustee of the family trust. Not my dad. Me. That trust held the home place, 180 acres, and the farmhouse my great-grandfather had put up board by board with his own 2 hands. Back then, I couldn't figure out why she'd pick me over the man she'd married. I just assumed she was being practical, since I was the one who read every page twice. It took me almost 5 years to understand her real reason, and I didn't get it until the morning the whole thing blew up. My mother passed on a Thursday in November, and my father fell apart in a way I wasn't ready to watch. Frank Kessler had been married to her 34 years. He didn't know how to run the coffee maker. He had no clue which bills came out automatically or where she stashed the spare key. For roughly a year, I drove the 14 miles out to the farm every couple of days just to keep him standing. I balanced his checking account. I sorted out his prescriptions. I sat with him through the meals that hurt worst, the holidays, the anniversary of her birthday. I told myself that's simply what a daughter does, and I didn't resent it, because underneath all that sorrow, he was still my father. Toward the end, my mom had confessed that her deepest fear wasn't dying. It was leaving him behind, soft and by himself, because, as she put it, a lonely man with property is a bullseye, and she wouldn't be around to plant herself between him and the wrong kind of person. I figured she was just worn out and rambling. Then he met Diane at a church supper a couple of counties east of us. They got married 14 months after the funeral. It happened so fast that some of the neighbors were still dropping off casseroles when it was already done. Diane Ackley was 52, divorced twice, quick-eyed and warm in that particular way people are when they're always keeping track of where the doors are. She moved into the farmhouse, and about a month later her grown son Cody moved in too, right into my childhood bedroom, with his motorcycle parts stacked out on the porch. I honestly tried to be happy about it. A lonely man had company again, and that should have been a blessing. But something went sour in my dad over that first winter, and it took me a bit to put a name to it. He started dropping lines like, "Your mother handed the place to you instead of me. Like I'm just renting on my own farm." He'd say it lightly, the way people say something they've been quietly turning over for months. Diane never pushed back when he brought it up. She'd only nod slowly and let the words hang there in the room. I'd notice her studying me whenever I came by with the quarterly statements. Not hostile, exactly, just taking my measure. I should have taken hers right back. The townhouse was Diane's idea, and by early spring it had an address and a price. A four-bedroom over on Larkin Avenue, listed at $265,000, with a front porch she said took her straight back to her childhood. To pull it off, they wanted to sell off the rear 30 acres. Except that ground wasn't theirs to sell. It belonged to the trust, which meant in the eyes of the law it belonged to my mother's wishes, and I was the one holding the pen. I didn't want a war, so I bent. I offered to put $55,000 of my own savings toward the down payment, a straight gift, no conditions, just so the math would work without anybody touching that land. And I told them I'd seriously look at selling part of the acreage if we did it the right way. A proper appraisal. Notice to the other beneficiary. A sit-down with the trust attorney. That's not me being a pain. That's just how you keep from getting sued down the road. I even phoned Ruth Callahan, the lawyer who'd helped my mom set the whole trust up, and asked her to get the paperwork moving correctly. Diane didn't hear yes. What she carefully heard was stall. One night over supper, she set a stack of papers next to my plate and said, "Smooth as anything, your mother's gone, sweetheart. This is our family now." My dad stared at his fork. Cody smirked down at his phone. The temperature in that kitchen felt like it dropped 10 degrees, and I finally understood that to them, my signature wasn't a protection. It was a chore they figured I'd just do, like handing over the dinner rolls. Problem was, I'd read that trust 100 times. I'd read it the night my mother put her name to it and plenty of nights after. A chore was the one thing it was never going to be. Everything came to a head over that same supper, 2 weeks ahead of their closing date. They'd already handed over $18,000 in earnest money. I had no idea of that yet. Diane pushed the sale agreement across the table and tapped the signature line with one manicured nail. "All we need is your name right here," she said. "Closing's on the 22nd. My dad finally raised his eyes. "It's all set up," he said. Gary Wexler drew it up. Gary Wexler, my father's golfing buddy of 20-some years who happened to hold a law license. I kept my voice steady. "I can't put my name on this tonight." Diane's smile didn't budge. "And why in the world not? Because it's trust land," I said. "There's a process. An appraisal, notice to the beneficiaries, an honest valuation. I'm not permitted to just sign it off because it's convenient. And really, neither of us should want me to." I looked at my dad when I said that last part. He was the other beneficiary. I was protecting him too, whether or not he could see it. The kitchen went silent except for the clock ticking above the stove. Cody muttered something about how I always thought I was above everybody else. Diane set her fork down. "So you're going to hold up your father's whole future," she said, over a stack of forms. "Over my mother's written instructions," I said. "Those aren't the same thing." My dad's jaw tightened. He didn't say a word. That was the part that scooped me hollow. Not the anger, the silence. I left the pen where it was and set it down next to her papers. "Thanks for dinner." Then I drove the 14 miles home, headlights cutting across an empty county road, and I didn't cry, because crying wasn't going to balance anybody's books. I just kept turning it over, how a man can sit at his own table and pick a side without ever opening his mouth. He called the next morning at 6:40 while I was parked outside my own office with the lights still off inside. I didn't grab it in time, so it rolled to voicemail. And that's the message I mentioned at the start. I want you to hear it the way it hit me, cold in a truck, before I'd had a sip of coffee. "Delia, we've talked it over. You're done. Don't come back around. We're moving on without you." And then, faint, almost buried under his voice, Diane in the background. "Tell her about the trust." A pause. Then my dad again, lower. "We'll handle the trust." Click. I sat there with my thumb over the screen. There's a specific kind of stillness that settles over you when somebody you love hands you a thing you can never unreceive. I didn't tremble. I didn't yell. I ran his words back in my head the same way I read a tax notice, hunting for what it actually said underneath what it was meant to scare me into. We'll handle the trust. As if it were theirs to handle. I typed one word, the only truthful one I had in me. Fine. I read it back once before I hit send, and I'll be honest with you, it wasn't a white flag. People hear a word like fine and assume it means surrender. Mine meant the exact opposite. It meant I was finished pouring my whole life into people who just told me, on a recording I'd have forever, that I didn't count as family. For close to 3 years I'd been bending so this family wouldn't snap. That morning they snapped it themselves with a phone call before the sun was even all the way up. So I quit holding it. And the first thing a person does when she finally stops carrying something that heavy is set it down. I just happened to be holding a good deal more than they'd realized. Here's exactly what I did before lunchtime, and every bit of it was fully within my rights. First, the $55,000. That was my money, sitting in my own savings account, promised as a gift toward a house I was no longer welcome inside. The deal hadn't closed. A gift you haven't actually handed over is still yours. I emailed Gary Wexler one clean line. Please note that I am withdrawing my offered down payment contribution, effective immediately. Then I called my bank and confirmed that not a single dollar had moved. Second, the trust. As trustee, I wasn't about to get stampeded into selling the rear 30 acres under a closing deadline I never agreed to. So I did the opposite of rushing. I started the process the right way. I formally ordered the appraisal. I logged the request. I filed everything. And I refused to authorize any sale until that process was finished. That's not a weapon. That's a trustee doing her actual job, the slow and careful way the law expects. But to folks who were banking on my speed, slow feels like a door slammed in your face. Trust locked, not out of spite. Locked the way a vault gets locked when the person in charge of it finally quits letting herself be talked into leaving it open. House deal on life support, because without my $55,000 and without any trust money, the numbers on Larkin Avenue never added up in the first place. I want to be straight about how it felt. It wasn't a victory rush. It was quiet and a little cold, like the first hard frost after a long, warm autumn, the one that finally kills off the thing you've been babying all season. I shut my laptop. I unlocked the shop and flipped the sign to open. I brewed the coffee I'd let go cold. I had a hardware store payroll due by 3, and life, unlike family, keeps its appointments. I'd switched my phone to silent to run payroll. When I turned it back over afterward, the screen looked like a slot machine that had landed on nothing but bad luck. 52 missed calls. 34 from my dad, 12 from a number I didn't recognize, the rest from Diane, plus one text from Gary Wexler sent at 10:07 that morning. I read it standing at my counter with a client's tax form still in my hand. Delia, we've got a serious problem. Call me before you do anything at all. I laid the phone face down on the counter. A serious problem. He wasn't exactly wrong. He just had the ownership of it backward. See, a man who tells his daughter never to come back 12 hours before he needs her $55,000 and her signature to close on a house, that man has a serious problem. It's just not the one he thinks it is, and it sure isn't mine. I finished Mrs. Garrett's tax forms. I double-checked her withholding and clipped the copies together. I walked her to the door and told her to give her grandkids my best. Then I poured myself a second cup and looked at that text one more time, and I felt something I hadn't felt in nearly 3 years. I felt like I could pull a breath all the way down to the bottom. 52 calls in 3 hours. They'd figured out all at once just how much of their whole plan had been resting on the person they'd tossed out at dawn. I scrolled the log top to bottom, the way you scan a column looking for the one entry that's throwing the total off. There it was, the timestamps marching down the screen, panic laid out in numbers, which is the only language I really trust. I didn't call Gary back. I wasn't going to do anything at all, not the way he meant it. I was going to do exactly one thing first, and it wasn't going to happen on his clock. The one thing I did was call my own lawyer, not Gary. Gary was my father's guy, paid by my father, looking out for my father. Nothing wrong with that, except people around Caldwell Springs have a habit of forgetting whose lawyer belongs to whom. Ruth Callahan had put together my mother's trust in the back office of an old converted mill, my mom signing in blue ink and laughing about how important it all made her feel. Ruth was 58, gray hair in a braid, and allergic to nonsense of any kind. I drove over and laid it all out plainly. The supper. Voicemail? The $55,000 I'd pulled back, the appraisal I'd ordered. She listened without cutting in, which is rarer in a lawyer than you'd guess. When I was done, she folded her hands. "Let me tell you where you stand," she said. "That money was yours. You can give a gift or not give a gift right up to the second it leaves your account. Nobody can force your hand." She tapped the trust binder. "And as trustee, you're not just allowed to refuse a rushed sale, you're required to move carefully. That's the whole job. No court is going to second-guess you for following the document and honoring your mother's intent." Then she paused, and something moved across her face. Not worry, more like a memory surfacing. "There's one more thing," she said. "When your mother signed the trust, she left a sealed side letter with the firm. Her own written instructions, signed and dated, telling us to hand it to you only if a dispute ever came up over the land." She looked at me over the top of her glasses. "Sure looks to me like there's a fight over the land." My mouth went dry. "What's in it?" "I never opened it," Ruth said. "Marion's handwriting on the front, just your name." She slid it across the desk and I didn't reach for it, not yet. I'll come back to that letter because I didn't open it that day, and you'll see why it mattered that I waited. First, Diane came to my shop. She timed it for a Friday at lunch, when she knew the place would be packed. The bell over the door jingled, and there she was in a coat too fancy for our town, already raising her voice before she'd even reached my counter. "Well, look who it is," she announced to the whole room. The daughter who walked out on her grieving father over a patch of dirt. 3 of my clients were sitting in my waiting chairs, the hardware store manager and 2 women from the Lutheran church. Every last one of them stopped pretending they weren't listening. "Hi, Diane," I said. "Is there something I can help you with?" "You can sign the papers, that's what you can do." She planted herself right in the middle of my office. "You're ripping this family to shreds. Your mother would be ashamed of you. This is our family now, and you're locking us out of our own home." There it was again, that line, the one she loved most. I came around the counter slow and held the door open for her. "I've got clients," I said. "If you want to talk, Ruth Callahan can set up a meeting with the lawyers in the room." Her face went blotchy. She swept out and the bell jingled behind her like nothing at all had happened. I turned back to my waiting room. Mrs. Fenwick, who'd buried 2 husbands and was scared of exactly no one, looked at me and said, "Your mama would not be ashamed of you, honey. She'd be proud." Small towns talk, I let them. By Sunday, half the county had heard Diane's version. By Monday, the other half had heard Mrs. Fenwick's. My dad's calls shifted after that. He quit demanding and started grieving at me, which is a whole lot harder to hold a line against. He left a voicemail Sunday night, and his voice broke right in the middle of it. "You're killing this family, Delia. Your mother would be ashamed. We raised you better than to turn your back on your own father." I sat on my kitchen floor with my spine against the cabinets and listened to it twice. I won't lie to you and pretend it bounced off. It didn't. There's no part of you built solid enough that your father saying your dead mother would be ashamed if you doesn't find a soft spot and lean on it. I wanted to call him back. I wanted to fix it the way I'd fixed every broken thing in that family since I was 21. But I'd learned something running other people's books for 12 years. When your hands are shaking, you don't make the entry from memory. You go back to the source document. So I didn't call. I got up off that floor, pulled out the trust, and read again in my mother's plain words exactly what my job was. It steadied me better than any pep talk could have. I wasn't being cruel. I was being correct. Those 2 things are different no matter how loudly somebody insists they're the same. I texted my dad 1 line and 1 line only. "I love you. I'm still following Mom's trust." He never answered. If you've ever been guilted for finally standing your ground, if the people who hurt you flipped it around and painted you as the heartless one, drop the word boundaries in the comments so I know you're out there. The part where this turns is coming. While I held my line, their whole plan was quietly going up in flames. And I want to be fair about how it happened. Without my $55,000 and without any trust money, my dad and Diane were short, badly short, on a house they'd already promised to buy. The sellers, a retired couple headed to Arizona, had a backup offer and zero patience. Their agent sent Gary a letter, close on the 22nd, as agreed, or forfeit the $18,000 in earnest money and face a claim for their costs. $18,000. My dad didn't have that kind of cash lying around. Almost none of it had ever been his money to begin with. It was supposed to be the land's money, and mine. I heard the worst of it from Aunt Lorna, my mother's younger sister, who still drove out to check on Frank because that's just the kind of woman she is. He's not sleeping, she told me over the phone. Sits out on the porch half the night with the radio switched off. Diane's on him all day about where the money went, and Cody's no help, just eats and gripes. I felt it then, that old pull, the one that had steered my life for close to 3 years. He was my father, he was hurting, and I had a checkbook. But here's what I finally understood, sitting at my own kitchen table with my own coffee. I hadn't caused any of this. They'd spent money that was never theirs, on a promise they'd squeezed out of a person they then threw away at 6 in the morning. Frost doesn't kill a healthy plant. It only finishes off what was already too tender to make it. I told Aunt Lorna I loved her, and I loved him, and I still wasn't going to sign. She was quiet a second. Then she said, good, and she meant every letter of it. Ruth called me on a Wednesday and asked me to come read the letter. I'd been dodging it, and she knew. You don't have to, she said. But Marion wrote it for exactly this moment. Seems a shame to leave her talking to an empty room. I drove over after I locked up the shop. The letter sat on her desk where she'd left it, a plain white envelope gone soft at the corners from 5 years in a file. My name across the front in my mother's slanted, careful hand, the same writing that used to show up on my lunch bags and my report cards, and later on the legal pad where she worked out who'd get what after she was gone. I picked it up and didn't open it. Why'd she think there'd be a fight? I asked. Ruth took off her glasses. Your mother was sick, not blind, she said. She knew your father. She loved him, and she knew exactly what he'd do if he got lonely and somebody started whispering in his ear. She nodded at the envelope. She wasn't protecting the land from him. She was protecting him from himself. And she picked you to do it. My mother had been dead nearly 3 years. She still wasn't finished talking. I sat down in the chair across from Ruth, the same chair my mother had signed her trust in, and turned the envelope over in my hands a few more times. Outside, the streetlights were flickering on along the avenue. I thought about everyone who told me that month what my mother would or wouldn't think of me. Diane, my dad, half the church. And now here was Mom herself in her own handwriting about to weigh in. My thumb found the seal. I opened it slow, the way you peel off a bandage you know is stuck. 1 page, both sides, blue ink. She started the way she always did, no fuss. Delia Bug, if Ruth is handing you this, then it's happened, and I'm sorry I'm not there to take the heat alongside you. I had to stop and breathe before I could keep going. Then she told me why. I didn't make you trustee because you're the clever one, though you are. I made you trustee because you're the only person in this family who can tell your father no and still love him in the same breath. He can't tell himself no. He never could. Someday somebody's going to show up wanting this land turned into cash, and they'll get to him when he's weak, and he'll talk himself into believing it's what we all wanted. It won't be. There's something I never told you, Delia. My own mother lost her daddy's farm exactly like this. A second husband, a sweet smile, a deed signed at a kitchen table before anybody could stop it. I was 10. We rented rooms after that, and she grieved that ground until the day she died. I made you trustee so you'd be the one standing where nobody stood for her. Keep the place whole, baby. Not for the dirt. For the next people who'll need somewhere that didn't get sold off in a bad season. And listen to me. Her handwriting pressed down harder there, the way it did when she meant a thing all the way to the bottom. The day they tell you you're not family, that's the day you'll know I was right to pick you. Family doesn't throw you out for doing the very job they trusted you with. So don't you dare feel guilty. You're not the one who left. I read it 3 times. I sat in that chair and didn't make a sound, but something that had been crouched down in my chest for close to 3 years stood all the way up and walked out the door. I'd never known about my grandmother's farm. My mother had carried that loss her entire life and never once said it out loud. Not to me, not to anybody. She'd been afraid of this for years. Not the exact morning, she was no fortune teller, but the shape of it, because she'd watched it happen once to her own mother and sworn it would never happen again. She hadn't just been practical when she chose me. She'd handed me a backbone and a reason, and only now did I grasp the size of both. I folded the letter and slid it into my own breast pocket, over my heart, where I could feel the edge of it against me. "Okay, Mom," I said. This time the word meant something brand new. With that letter tucked against my chest, I was finally ready to let Ruth translate Gary's serious problem into words that meant something. She read through his texts and the one stiff letter he'd sent, and she came close to laughing out loud. "He's bluffing," she said. "Look at what he's actually alleging. He claims you interfered with the purchase and that you might be on the hook as trustee. Both of those are wrong." She raised one finger. "The $55,000 was a personal gift you never handed over. You can't interfere with a sale by choosing to hold on to your own money. That's not interference. That's just declining to spend." A second finger went up. "And as trustee, refusing to rush the sale of trust property while you follow the appraisal process your mother's document lays out, that's not a breach either. It's the exact opposite. You'd only be in trouble if you'd sign the whole thing away over a weekend to keep your father's new wife happy." She set the letter down flat. "The real serious problem, Delia, is that Gary let his client sign a purchase contract spending money that wasn't his and was never promised on paper. That is a problem. But it's his client's problem, and maybe his own malpractice carrier's problem if he isn't careful, and it is not one bit yours." I sat with that a second. "So when he says we've got a serious problem, he means they do." "That's right," Ruth said. "And he's counting on you not knowing the difference, so you'll panic and sign just to make the whole thing go away." I'd spent 12 years watching people try to make a number vanish by saying it with enough confidence. It never works. Numbers don't care how sure your voice sounds, and it turns out neither does a trust document. I told Ruth to fire back a short reply on my behalf. 3 lines, no heat. It said I had nothing to discuss outside a properly noticed meeting with counsel present, and that my position was simple. I was following the trust. A thing like this doesn't stay tidy between 4 people in a small town. It ran through the whole family like a crack spreading across a windshield, and everybody picked a side. Aunt Lorna was with me from day one, loud about it too, which helped more than she knew. She turned up at my shop with a thermos and a casserole and a memory. "You know your mama planted those oaks along the back 30 the year you were born," she said. "One for you." She'd come home from chemo too weak to stand and still ask if somebody had watered them. She set the dish on my counter. "Your mother didn't hand you that land, Delia. She handed you a spine. So use it." On the other side, there was my Uncle Warren, who called to tell me I was breaking my father's heart, and that blood ran thicker than paperwork. I told him blood was exactly the reason I was being careful, and he hung up on me. The Lutheran ladies split straight down the middle of the fellowship hall. It would have been funny if it hadn't been my life. But here's what I noticed, standing in the middle of all that noise. The people who'd known my mother best, who'd watched her work that ground and battle that disease, landed on my side without me asking them to. The ones who'd only ever heard Diane's telling landed on hers. Truth has a long memory in a small place. Folks who'd known Marian Kessler for 3 decades were not about to believe she'd raised a daughter who'd toss her own father out in the cold for spite. They knew better. They'd known her. And they were about to learn just how much of her had ended up in me. When the guilt didn't take and the gossip didn't stick, they grabbed the only lever they had left. Gary Wexler sent a letter on real letterhead, the kind designed to drop your stomach through the floor. It said my father meant to petition the court to remove me as trustee for breach of fiduciary duty and acting against the beneficiary's interests. Cody snapped a photo of it and put it up on Facebook with the caption, "Getting our land back. Some people forget who family is." 31 likes. A cousin left a row of clapping hands underneath. I read the letter twice, and I'll admit my heart sped up, because the word court does that to a person even when you're standing on solid ground. So I did the thing I'd trained myself to do. I carried it straight to Ruth. She read this one slower than the last, then set it down and looked at me with something close to a smile. "Now they've shown us their hand," she said. "This is good for you." "It doesn't feel good," I said. "Feelings aren't filings," she said. "Sit down. Let me walk you through how removing a trustee actually works, because it's nothing like the way Gary's letter wants you to feel it works." Outside, a truck rumbled past hauling somebody's seed corn. I had the strangest, steadiest feeling, like I'd been walking on river ice for a month and just felt my boot hit real ground underneath. Quick thing before it turns. If anybody's ever told you you're the one tearing the family apart because you refuse to be the family doormat, drop the word boundaries so I know you're out there. Then stick around, because what happened at that lawyer's table is the whole reason I'm telling this. To remove a trustee, Ruth said, you go to court and you prove cause. Real cause. Bad faith, self-dealing, wasting the assets, ignoring the document. She ticked them off on her fingers. So tell me, Delia, did you take $1 of trust money for yourself? No. Did you sell anything, lose anything, hide anything? No. Did you follow your mother's instrument and order a proper appraisal? Yes. She spread her hands. Then there's nothing to remove you for. Anybody can file a petition, mind you. That part's cheap and your father's welcome to try. Winning one is a whole different animal. No judge removes a trustee for being careful. He's going to wonder why the people filing are in such a rush to sell land that isn't even theirs. She leaned back. Here's the piece Gary's banking on you not understanding. That earnest money, the $18,000 they're about to lose, that exposure exists because they signed a contract relying on funds nobody ever committed in writing. That's on them. You turning down a gift and following a process didn't create their trouble. Their trouble was baked in the day they spent money they didn't have. It landed clean, the way a column finally balances after you've hunted the error for an hour. All month I'd been carrying this low dread that maybe, somehow, I was the one in the wrong, that maybe a daughter who won't sign really is the villain of the story. Ruth had just laid the ledger out in front of me and my side balanced. Theirs didn't. So what do? I asked. You offer them a fair way out, on the record, she said. Not because you owe them, because it's right. And because when they turn it down, and they will, nobody in this county will have any doubt left about who was being reasonable. I liked that. It sounded like something my mother would have done. So I offered them a fair path in writing, through Ruth. I want you to hear it, because this is the part people skip when they tell a revenge story, and it's the part that matters most. I didn't want to ruin my father. I wrote that I'd consider a partial sale of the acreage, not the home place, not my mother's oaks, but a defined back parcel at a proper appraised value, with the proceeds run through the trust the way the document required. I wrote that some of that money could go toward decent housing for my father, since supporting him was actually within my discretion when it was done correctly. I asked for exactly 2 things in return. 1, a real appraisal, no rushing. 2, that the talk about kicking me out of the family and pulling me as trustee had to stop, because you cannot throw someone out in the morning and demand her cooperation by nightfall. That's not a punishment, that's just how reality works. Ruth sent it over. We heard back in a day. The answer came from Diane, not my dad, and it came through Gary, and it was no, not a counter, not let's talk, just no. Gary wrote that his clients would not accept conditions dictated by Ms. Kessler. Conditions. I'd offered to fund my father's house and pay for a fair appraisal, and the one condition they couldn't stomach was being asked to stop telling people I wasn't family. That told me everything. This had never really been about the land, or even the money. It was about whether I'd kneel. I read the rejection twice, and instead of the dread I'd hauled around all month, I felt almost weightless, because now I knew for certain I'd done right by everyone, them included, and they'd said no in writing. Gary called the meeting himself. 3 days before the closing date, he was about to blow. He framed it as a chance to sort everything out before this gets out of hand, which is lawyer for my client is about to lose $18,000, and I need you in a room. He said it at his own office on his own turf, Thursday at 10. I think he pictured me walking in scared and alone, ready to sign anything just to make the noise stop. I told Ruth yes. Then I told her I wanted her right beside me, and I wanted us there 5 minutes early, not late, and I wanted the file in order. You don't have to go at all, Ruth reminded me. Nothing legally requires it, I know, I said. But I want to. And I did, for a reason I couldn't quite put into words yet. Some part of me needed to sit in a room with all of them, lights on, witnesses present, and let the truth stand up on its own without anybody having to shout it. I'd spent nearly 3 years managing this family in private. Quiet phone calls, careful texts, signatures on kitchen tables. Just once, I wanted it set out in the open, on the record, where it couldn't get twisted into some other story by Sunday. They'd built this whole thing on the belief that I'd never make them say it to my face, that I was too soft, too polite, too scared of being the bad daughter. They set the table for a girl like that. They just forgot whose name was on the deed underneath it. I laid out my best blazer Wednesday night, the navy one, and made sure my mother's letter was still in the breast pocket. It was. My dad called the night before the meeting, late, close to 11. I almost let it ring out. I picked up because he was still my father, and because some doors you keep a hand on even after you've decided not to walk through them. Delia, he said, and his voice was wrecked. I don't know how we got here. For a second it was just him. The man who taught me to drive a stick in the church parking lot. The man who cried at my mother's grave until Aunt Lorna had to walk him to the car. I miss your mother every single day, he said, and his breath caught. I just need this to close, please. We've got nothing if it doesn't. And God help me, I felt it. The grief under the anger was real. He wasn't a monster. He was a lonely man who'd let somebody steer him off a cliff and was only now feeling the wind rush past. I nearly softened the whole way through. Then he kept going. If you just signed it the first time, he said, and the wreckage in his voice hardened into something older and meaner, none of this would be happening. You did this, Delia. You put us here. And there it was. Not an apology. A bill made out to me for a debt that was his. He'd reached for the soft part, found it, and pressed. Same as the voicemail, just slower. I closed my eyes. I love you, Dad, I said. I'll see you at 10. I hung up before he could find the next soft spot. I sat in the dark a good while with the letter in my hand. Then I hung the blazer on my door and went to bed, and I slept better than I had in a month. Let me tell you what calm actually is, because people get it wrong. They think calm is when nothing's wrong. It isn't. Calm is what's left over once you've already decided. Thursday morning, I got up early and built my file the way I build every file for a hard meeting. Clean, ordered, nothing for me to fumble over. The trust instrument tabbed, the appraisal notice dated. My one-line email withdrawing the $55,000, timestamp showing it went out before any closing. Ruth's plain language summary of the law. And in my breast pocket, not in the file, my mother's letter, because that one wasn't evidence for a lawyer. It was ballast for me. I wasn't bringing it to read out loud. I was bringing it so my hands would hold steady. I made coffee and didn't drink it. I checked the file twice, then a third time, the way Mom used to check the truck's oil before a long drive, not because she doubted it, but because checking was how she said a prayer. I looked at myself in the hall mirror, navy blazer, hardly any makeup, the same face that runs payroll for the hardware store, and I said it out loud to nobody. You're not going there to win. You're going there to be done. That's a different errand. Winning is loud and needs an audience and never quite fills you up. Being done is quiet and only needs the truth and a door you can walk out of. I'd spent almost 3 years trying to win my family back, one favor at a time. That Thursday, I wasn't going to win anything. I was going to set the whole heavy thing down on Gary Wexler's conference table in front of witnesses and walk out lighter. I grabbed my keys. The drive to Gary's office was 4 minutes. I made every one of them count. Gary's conference room had a long table that tried too hard. Dark wood buffed to a shine, a bowl of mints nobody ever touched. When Ruth and I walked in at 5 till 10, the room was already fuller than I'd expected, and I understood right away that Gary had stacked it. My father sat at the far end, smaller than I remembered, hands flat on the wood. Diane beside him in a red blazer, chin lifted, eyes already hot. Cody slouched against the wall with his arms crossed, there for the show. Gary at the head, reading glasses down his nose, a fat folder squared in front of him. And two people I hadn't counted on. A young man from the bank in a gray suit, the loan officer, and a brisk woman with a leather portfolio who turned out to be the seller's agent. I clocked them in a second, and something settled in me because Gary had made a mistake. He'd brought witnesses. He thought he was bringing pressure. What he'd actually done was guarantee that whatever got said in this room got said in front of people with no reason to lie about it later. I sat where Ruth pointed, halfway down where I could see everyone. The ceiling fan turned slow. Somewhere a clock ticked. Diane stared at me the way she'd stared across that pot roast, measuring. My dad wouldn't look at me at all. Gary cleared his throat the way men do when they want the room to know they're running it. Well, he said, opening his folder, let's see if we can talk some sense into things. He looked over his glasses at me, not at Ruth, at me, the way you look at the weakest seat at the table. Delia, he said, you've created quite a situation. He laid it out like a closing argument to a jury he was sure was already his. Let's be clear about what's happened here, Gary said, sliding a stapled document across the table at me. Your father and Diane entered a binding agreement in good faith. You, as trustee, undermined that agreement. You pulled a committed contribution at the 11th hour. You've exposed this family to real financial harm. $18,000 in earnest money, potentially more. He let it hang. Now we can resolve this today cleanly if you'll authorize the parcel sale and reinstate your contribution. Or we proceed with the petition to remove you as trustee. And frankly, Delia, that's not a fight you want. Diane nodded along like a metronome. Cody smirked. The bank kid looked down at his hands. The seller's agent watched it all with the flat patience of somebody billing by the hour. The document in front of me was the same sale agreement from that pot roast dinner, signature line still empty, still tapped, I'd have bet, by a polished nail. Gary folded his hands on his folder and waited for me to be afraid. The fan ticked overhead. Diane's nail found the edge of the table and started a slow, impatient tap, the same beat she'd tapped on the signature line at dinner, like she was already counting the money. I want you to picture it. The whole room leaning toward me. All that pressure, all those eyes, and the easiest thing on earth would have been to pick up the pen and make it stop. A month before, I might have. But I had a letter in my pocket from a woman who'd seen this exact morning coming 4 years out. So I didn't reach for the pen. I reached for my own folder, the clean one, and I set it on the table and I opened it slow. I'm not going to authorize the sale today, I said. My voice came out level, almost soft, and I watched Gary lean in a little because soft made him think I was folding. And before anyone files anything, I think we should all be looking at the same facts. So let's. I laid the first page where the loan officer and the seller's agent could both see it. This is my mother's trust. I'm the trustee. It requires an appraisal and notice before any sale of this land. I ordered the appraisal. I gave the notice. I haven't sold, and I haven't refused to sell. I've declined to skip the steps the document requires. That's not a breach. That's the job. I laid down the second page. This is the $55,000. It was my personal money, a gift I offered and hadn't yet given. I withdrew it in writing on the morning of the 16th, before any closing, before any of it was committed on paper. I looked up at Gary and kept my voice exactly where it was. You can't interfere with a sale by keeping your own money in your own account. Gary, you went to law school. You know that. Ruth spoke once, quiet and dry. A trustee following the trust instrument and a private citizen declining to make a gift are both acting entirely within their rights. There's no cause for removal here. They can file if they'd like to spend the money, but a court would have a hard time finding any reason to act on it. The loan officer was nodding before he caught himself. The seller's agent had stopped taking notes and was just listening now. Then I turned the last page toward the middle of the table, where everyone could see it. "Here's the actual serious problem," I said. "Somebody signed a purchase contract for $265,000, spending money that wasn't his, that nobody ever committed in writing. When that money didn't show up, the contract was always going to collapse. That's not something I did to you. I let it land, gentle as setting down a full cup. That's something you did to yourselves and then drove 14 miles into town to blame on me." Gary's face had gone the dark red of a man whose closing argument just got entered as the other side's exhibit. He opened his mouth. Diane got there first. She shot up so fast her chair barked against the floor. "You ungrateful little." She caught herself, but only halfway. Her whole face had come apart, all that smoothness gone, and the words shook coming out. "Your father took you to every appointment. He raised you. And the second he needs you, you slam the door and hide behind your dead mother and your paperwork." She slapped her hand flat on the table hard enough to rattle the mints. "Your mother is dead, Delia. She's dead. This is our family now, and you are not going to ruin it." There it was, the third time she'd thrown that line at me, and the loudest and the last. The room had gone dead silent around her. The loan officer sat very still. The seller's agent froze her pen above the page. My father finally lifted his eyes to me, and I held them, not Diane's, when I answered. I didn't stand. I didn't raise my voice. I think that's what turned the room, that she was on her feet shaking and I was sitting still. "You're right," I said. "My mother's gone. I know, I was there, a beat. That's exactly why her trust answers to me and not to you. She wrote it that way on purpose, while she was alive, in her own words, because she knew this day was coming." Diane's mouth worked, but nothing came out. Then I turned to my dad and dropped my voice low as a hand on a shoulder, because what I had to say to him I'd waited almost 3 years to be allowed to say. "You left me a voicemail," I said. "You told me I was out. You said move on without me. I let the next part come gentle, which is the only way a truth like that should ever come. So I did, Dad. I moved on first. You can't put your family out at 6 in the morning and still own her at 10. He had no answer. There isn't one. Cody had stopped smirking somewhere in the last minute and was staring at his shoes. Diane stood there in her red blazer with one hand still on the table, breathing hard, finally understanding she'd been the loudest person in a room she'd already lost. And then I gave them the way out one more time, on the record, in front of every witness Gary had so helpfully gathered. I think that surprised them more than anything. "Here's where we are," I said, and I slid my written offer to the center of the table, the same one they'd already turned down once. "I'll fund decent housing for my father out of a proper appraised partial sale, handled through the trust the way Mom required. The home place and the oak stay. And the talk about me not being family stops today." I looked around the table. "That's the same offer I made last week. It's fair. It's probably more than you'd get from a judge. Take it, and we all go home lighter." The room waited. The loan officer actually leaned forward. For one breath, I thought my dad might reach for it. Then Diane, who could not stand to let me be the reasonable one, said tight and low, "We're not taking conditions from her." And my father handed the chance to choose his daughter over his pride one more time, looked down at the table and said nothing, which was its own kind of choosing. So the deal was dead. The 18,000 was gone. The Larkin Avenue house would belong to the backup buyers by Friday. They'd done every bit of that to themselves, in that room with witnesses, after I'd handed them a rope twice. Gary shuffled his pages, his fat folder suddenly just paper. If they filed to remove me now, they'd be filing on nothing, and they knew it, with 2 neutral witnesses sitting right there. I gathered my file, slow and neat, and tapped it square on the table. I stood. I didn't slam anything. Didn't gloat. Didn't say a word about winning, because I hadn't come to win. At the door, I turned just once and looked at the people who'd told me I was out. I gave them the same word I'd given them that morning in the truck, the one they'd been so sure meant I was beaten. "Fine," I said, and I left. The parking lot was bright after that dim room, the kind of clean spring light that makes everything look freshly rinsed. Ruth came out behind me pulling on her gloves, and she didn't say anything for a second, which from Ruth is a compliment. Then she said, "Your mother would have liked that." I climbed into my truck, the same cab where I'd heard the voicemail a month before, and I sat a moment with my hands on the wheel and the letter still in my pocket. I waited to feel sad. Some of it came, sure. You don't watch your father pick his pride over you and feel nothing. But mostly what I felt was light, all the way down, the way you feel when you finally set down a thing you've carried so long you forgot it had any weight. Then I drove back into town, to my shop, to the work that had never once told me I wasn't family. Here's how it shook out. In the plain numbers, I trust more than feelings. The Larkin Avenue deal collapsed. My father and Diane lost their $18,000 in earnest money and caught a bill from the seller's lawyer on top of it. The house in town never happened. Gary talked them out of the petition to remove me once he'd had a few days to think, because there was no cause to put in it, and nobody knew that better than he did. The 180 acres and the farmhouse and my mother's row of oaks are still whole, still in the trust, still doing exactly what she wanted them to do. My father still lives in that farmhouse, by the way. The trust provides for him, and I never touched that because being fair to him was always part of the job, even the morning he forgot to be fair to me. Diane and Cody moved out by the end of summer. I heard the marriage didn't survive a winter without the new house she'd been promised. Turns out some people only stay for the porch. Aunt Lorna still brings me casseroles I don't need and stories I do. The Lutheran ladies came back around, mostly the way small towns do once the truths had a season to settle. My dad and I talk now and then, short calls on my terms, with the door open just a crack. It isn't what it was. It may never be. But I sleep through the night, and my books balance, and the land my mother trusted me to keep is going to be there for whoever needs it next.